one of the things that I was very keen on when we were designing this podcast series was around making sure that we had a global conversation. And so today I'm really glad that Dionisio Garza-Sada, also known as Nicho to all his friends, who is the founder and CEO of a university platform called Talisis, joins us. Nicho is not a new entrant to the education sector, but he has immense capabilities and experience of actually building and running businesses, straddling other sectors as well. So oil and gas, real estate, venture capital and private equity, as well as, fintech. And when I think about what he's doing with Talisis, which is, a university platform where he has in excess of 20,000 students and operates in a number of different centers across this gigantic country of Mexico, I think there's a tremendous amount that we can learn about not just what's happening in Mexico in education, but also in terms of when you build an institution from ground up, what it takes to actually drive it. And so I'm really pleased that that Nicho is here with us today, and I look forward to this conversation in the Edvance Podcast. Welcome, Nicho. I'm really pleased that my friend Nicho is here. Nicho is a Mexican entrepreneur and a force for much good, actually, not just in the education sector, but out there in wider society in Latin America. And, he's created a platform called Talisis, which is a for-profit university platform, but with a difference. And so, Nicho, welcome to the Edvance Podcast. And I'd love for you to tell everyone, where did you even come up with the idea of a Talisis? And tell them exactly what you do.
Thank you, because it's a pleasure being in this podcast, and it's an honor. Everything that has to do with whatever you're doing, I'm always happy to participate in this ideas. Well, Talisis, as we say it in Spanish, Talisis, it's actually started around 2017. We had an idea about 2012, 2013. In that we wanted to invest as a family in specific areas that would generate not only, but also well-being for anybody in any sector. So this famous double bottom line issue that people talk about. And after a few years of owning a couple of universities, we realized that two things basically. First, in Mexico, the education model was not working at all. It was failing completely. And it was very old, etc. We can talk about this later. And second, that education was badly managed in general. So we decided to basically generate this platform, which when I say platform at the time, it wasn't tech. It was just basically processes, people, system integration, back office, etc. And then eventually, after 2017, 18, we started investing a lot in tech because of all the wave that was coming in through education. So we always believed that education was going to be revolutionized sometime in the near future back then by technology. And it has been, and it will be. And I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg now. But the idea why we started this is we realized that we could have a competitive advantage in generating quality students for the market, but also quality education for students that will go into the market and change their communities. And the way we wanted to do this is having every single home in Mexico with access to quality education, which right now, by the way, it's only about 30% of the people have access to education, higher education in general.
Wow.
So we want to take quality higher education to every single home in the country. We can only do that through processes, through a great culture, a great team, and of course, technology would be a big enabler.
Nicho, this whole thing about everyone should have the opportunity to go to university was quite I'm wondering whether these kinds of policies that exist in governments around the world, and I remember for when I was, some 20, 30 years ago in the UK, we had this mantra about education, and everyone should go to university. I sometimes wonder whether we can track back the malaise in the education sector because of such policies. Should everyone go to university?
And I don't think so. I don't think everybody should. Everybody should have access to education that would allow them for a better future. Well, if that's a university, that's fantastic. But there's also models that we do. We do teach some of those like boot camps and stuff like that. That you don't need, a 4-year diploma. You might need a 1-year diploma or an 8-month boot camp, and then you continue learning throughout your life. I think education will change because the pace of technology and revolution of the whole markets everywhere just moving so fast. Then you study a 4-year degree and you're very lucky to enter one of these universities. You have a network and learn about all these things. But 5-7 years down the road, you're going to have to relearn a lot of the things.
Yeah, you talked about the malaise of the Mexican education system, as it were, right? And so for those of us who are uneducated about that part of the world, can you tell us a little bit about what the problems are or the challenges are that gave rise to your platform?
Yeah, I think I would say there's 3 problems that we're trying to solve. The first one is access. As I said, only 30% of the population, around 30%, depends on the metric you look at, have access to higher education or above, whatever that means. That means, it can be a college degree, or a technical education, it can be a master's program, or it could be even just a boot camp or a small course that would, at the college level. That's one of them. And the way we try and solve access, as I said, is, it's a model that we take the university to you through technology or physical campus that is much smaller. So it's a no-frills campus. So we don't necessarily have all this big, soccer courses and soccer fields and, football fields, et cetera, et cetera. Cricket, I would say in England or in India, but in this part of the world, it's soccer. So we don't have all that infrastructure. Technology, the way we use technology is not only, smartphones and internet, but there's all other ways of reaching students at a lower cost, and also flexibility of schedule, which seems something very simple, but it's very important because people can work and study at the same time. So that's one of the things we're trying to solve: access. Second is we're trying to solve pertinence. In Spanish, called pertinencia. So it's that what you learn is actually useful for the world or for the market. You have in Latin America and in Mexico about 50% of the employers saying that college graduates do not have the skills that they need. I mean, it's a very talked about problem. And then 50% of the students now, this is more important, is they believe they do not graduate with the right skills. So that begs the question, why the hell are you studying, right? I mean, if you don't have the skills, the market, you're not being taught. So you want to change that. So the way we prepare courses is a lot faster. It's more oriented towards practical learning. It's less theoretical. We do a lot of, we call them estadías, which is like internships. You spend the whole quarter at a company, once, 2 or 3 or 4, 5 times in your career, in your school diploma, sorry. And then the final one, I think there's culture. There's a big cultural issue. And the issue is people do not believe yet in the power of education. There's a study that in at least in Mexico and Latin America studies, if every year of college or of education that you have, you can earn an extra around $1,500 a year in salary. It doesn't seem much, but for our average salary or wages, lower wages, it's a lot, especially when you do 4, 5, 6 years of education. Now, there's an opportunity cost on why people don't do it, because a person can earn, I'm going to talk in pesos, about 6,000 pesos, 8,000 pesos a month, which is 300 to 400 US dollars a month, or they can go and pay 1,000, 2,000 pesos, which is what, 50 or $100, but they can't do them both at the same time. So if we try and solve the 3 problems at once, then we're able to generate, maybe an offering that costs $15, $10 a month, which is online or hybrid. And then it can allow you to be flexible and work at the same time. So you can see the benefits, also get a good curriculum, and then eventually, have the time and the flexibility to be successful. And you don't have to take, 3 or 4 years. It can be 5 years. You can have, a specialty program, and then you can finish your college degree later on. So the way we try and solve it is putting those 3 things together. So again, it's 1, accessibility, 2 is pertinence of the curriculum, and 3 is a culture that matches everything so we can solve the problem for the people.
I can see from what you said, you're under the influence of America by the simple fact that you called it soccer and not football. No, you called it soccer and not football. So but I'll forgive that. We'll let that ride. Nicho, also you have this issue in university systems about education finance and loans and just the huge debt burden that we're putting on young people. How do you square that circle in Mexico?
It's a very different model. if I understood correctly, the question is, how do we deal with the debt burden in the country, correct? Or in our systems? Our students don't necessarily get into too much debt. The main difference, I guess, is governments don't necessarily fund education except when it's public. And they don't go, students, not many of them go with debt. So it's not the problem like in the US and other countries, which have huge amounts of debt when they graduate. And plus, that education system is much more expensive than our education system. So in Mexico, we now have a lot of offering that is very cheap. I mean, you can go to a full-time college for $100 a month, which is not too much, right?
Got it. And so, Nicho, in terms of when you think about the huge challenges that actually global society faces today, do you see universities as a way of actually meeting some of those challenges? So, for example, I think about the world today, and actually Mexico is no different in the sense of the polarization of politics, the general public discourse. You're not insulated from that any more than what I am. And so how do you see the role of universities in that kind of spectrum? As opposed to, I get what you're trying to do is making sure learners and undergraduates and graduates of your programs are work ready, but actually society ready is also something that I'm interested in hearing a little bit more from you about.
No, I mean, that's a fantastic point. We are not in this project just to generate people with abilities for the employer's market. We are also here because we do believe that we have an obligation to generate citizens that actually make a difference in their communities. I would like to say the world, but not everybody has the opportunity to make a difference in the world. So I'd start with your community. We do have specific programs on citizen values and stuff like that. And we do it even though we're going through lower segments of the population, of the socioeconomic population. There is a lot of need for this. And universities have to do, in my opinion, two things. Is one, they do need to have a curriculum that actually teaches and pushes for this. But two, they need to be a place where every single member of the community can come in with every single idea that they have, and they're a safe space for discussion. Universities are universal. I mean, they're universal of ideas. So even if you're a no-frills university like some of the ones we have, or a research university, there needs to be space for discussion. The topics might be different, and the money in R&D could be different, but ideas should always be open to discussion.
Tell me, in terms of, I sometimes feel that the higher education sector and university sector is so driven by rankings, on various metrics and axes, as it were. Obviously, in Mexico, the big daddy of them all is the Tec de Monterrey ecosystem that exists, and we all know that. But do you not think that universities are a little bit stretched when it comes to pursuing these kinds of credentials, in terms of as a indicator of the quality of education that they provide?
Yeah, I think now it's kind of debatable, right? If those rankings actually do show quality education one over another. But I think universities view them as, reputation building. If I'm in this ranking up there, then I'm more reputable than others. I might be a bit controversial, but I think universities in the future, given technology, you will have to have students that are right for each university. The stress that we put in students that are applying and they need to get certain scores, it's just huge. And it's not necessarily the best. I mean, of course, everybody wants to go to top universities, but is that the best thing for you? Maybe not. Maybe it is. I don't know. So that's something that we need to discuss, I think, further in the education system is this pressure actually helping? If you go back, I mean, you know this, but if you don't have social emotional learning and students are not able to cope with all this, having all this pressure when they're in high school, it's a second time the brain is trying to put all the neurons together. First time is 0 to 6 years old. Second is 18 to 24. I mean, some kids cannot take it. And what are the long-term effects on this? Are they going to be able to be successful citizens with all this pressure? Would they be healthy citizens? We don't know. I mean, I think there's evidence both ways.
And, I mean, we often talk about the the connection between universities and employment, but we seldom talk about the connection between universities and the K-12 school systems, public education in particular. What is your observation about the state of K-12 systems in Mexico, as an example, given that many of the students come to you?
The K-12 system in Mexico is terrible. Terrible compared to the world. There's the statistics on the PISA score. You know the PISA the test. So first, there's a debate in Mexico whether we should be at PISA or not. I think we should.
Yeah.
Just a matter of reference. But two, if you look at the scores, our best decile, the top 10%, is worse in ranking than the bottom 10% of Canada, which is what I mean. So that just speaks about the whole education system in Mexico, and it's terrible because it's ideological. The education system, the public education system, is governed by or ruled by ideology and not by performance. And that just generates a lack of strategy in the medium term. I mean, the countries that have been successful in this, Korea, Vietnam, etc., it takes them 2, 3, or 4 decades to get this going on. In Mexico, every 6 years, we change the president, we change the ideology. There's no strategy.
But do you not think that actually even the most high-performing systems in PISA, for example, are ideological? I mean, I give you, for example, Finland, Singapore, Korea, all these different places. It's not as if they're less ideological.
I mean, when I said ideological, I agree. But when I said ideological, I mean politically in Mexico, ideological. So it's a matter of ideological policy and not ideological in terms of what you learn. I'm sorry, my mistake there. I do think every single of them has an ideology. Of course, they have to.
Is it not? I mean, forgive me, and it's a subject I'm very interested in. That's why I ask, and I push you a little bit more on. And I'm not laying a trap for you to fall into. Trust me. But do you not think it's more about leadership than ideology?
Yes. You mean leadership in the government levels?
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest, when I look at, around the world, and I worked in public education systems quite a bit, and no one really wants to be an education minister, let's be clear. And so it's not necessarily a job that an aspiring political leader actually wants, and it's more or less a holding kind of stage. And it's less about ideology than more about the desirability of the actual post. That's what I mean in terms of just the leadership of the sector is what I'm thinking.
I think we're talking about the same thing, just looking at different angles. But yes, I do agree. It's political in its leadership and ideology, and I do agree. In Mexico, for example, the position is very important because you have about 3.
The budgets are huge. The budgets are huge.
That's the problem. I think they see it as a political venture, as a political strength arm, and not necessarily as a future of our generations. And the issue is, politicians in Mexico are elected based on short-term results. Nobody looks at long-term results because we have a short memory in general. And people in Mexico, especially in these countries, that the problems are not long-term problems. People basically have an issue of security, of food safety, of stuff like that, health. So I'm not going to worry what happens in 30 or 40 years. I want to eat now. I want to be safe today. I want my cancer drugs today. And that issue just generates that the electoral system or the electoral people, when they vote, they don't necessarily vote for these things. So it's kind of complicated. And that's why I think it's political. And the leadership is not there to provide quality education. It's to provide an implementation of a political ideology. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, I understand that. And so you have a pretty unique perspective, given that education is one of your interests and commercial interests. You also have, for example, investments in the oil and gas sector, in the real estate sector, and you also have like a fund, a venture capital or PE fund. And I'm interested in the learnings from those sectors and how you actually influence the quality of education and get high performance in education. And so, you being an entrepreneur and a business leader, I'm curious as to what your prescription is actually for education leaders to actually amp up performance and quality of education in their schools, in their universities, in their work environments, given just the scale of, in my opinion, inefficiency that exists in schools around the world. I'd love to get your perspective or your 3 hacks for high performance that we should all hear about and learn about.
I think there's always several different opinions there, but I think my opinion, the first thing for high performance that I would say is you need to have a clear vision of what you want to achieve. Um, and speaks to leadership, speaks to conceptualization of the problem, of the issue, and how you structure it. I think also something that educators need to start, little by little, learning from other industries. For example, from finance, we're heavily invested in finance, fintech specifically. Is these people try and solve huge problems around the world, and not just specific problems in a certain neighborhood. So if educators actually start thinking, how am I going to solve this problem in my whole community or in my whole country, my whole state, if you're in a big country, or in the whole continent, how am I going to solve this, very deeply or widely? That's something that I would recommend that we change. And I think that's part of this of Talisis, is that we don't want to solve a problem of one university. We want to solve a problem in Mexico. We might not solve it. It might take 20, 30, 40 years to make an impact. But there's a difference in the way we structure it in a mom and pop school, and how they think on solving the problems.
But tell me, in terms of on that point, it's really interesting when we talk about aligning vision and mission, I think is what you're referring to. And how much agency does an education leader, actually have in determining what the vision and mission of the organization or the system that they operate in is? How do you square that circle when you're, for example, a school principal in a K-12 school, where it's pretty set out what you have to achieve by regulatory regime or by your management, by your leadership. You don't really have much wiggle room to actually do anything, and that's beyond the confines of what is already done. What is your perspective on that?
I mean, I'm not an expert in those types of schools, but I think, if there are some constraints, natural constraints in the system, just think big within your system. Just try and improve whatever you can in a big way, and eventually, if you might be a matter of milestones. So if you make an impact in your school and that impact's big enough, somebody else will replicate it. And if you think about, what I'm doing eventually will be systematized in the whole education system, that, you might be lucky enough to have an impact in other schools. But also, I guess it's not everybody can have a big impact everywhere. If everybody just focuses on having one impact in their specific communities, the world will be very different.
Yes, it did. What is your second hack?
I think the second hack, and this is probably the first, but let's call it the second, is start with you. You as a person need to be well. You need to be physically well, mentally well, emotionally well. If you're not well, you can't perform. There's no way. Your team expects you to be well. And that, a few insights in what happened to me in the last years or so, is I've had team members telling me, you need to go on vacation. I'm like, why do I need to go on vacation? I'm working it. And the people I know, because when you come back from vacation, your mind's clear. You follow the path that we set in the better terms. You guide the team better. You're just not burnt out. And leadership is all about how you lead, not necessarily where you lead, but it's how you lead. Where you lead can change or not, but everyday leadership is how you're leading the team in the right direction. So, but if you're not well, then there's absolutely no way you can be a good leader. You can articulate a mission. You can articulate a purpose. You can't do it if you're not well yourself.
So what investment do you make in your wellness?
Well, it varies, depends on the season, but I try to, all my life, I try to do a lot of sports wherever I can. Took on bicycle, that allows me, I do road bicycling. That allows me to free my mind. It's 2 or 3 hours of not doing anything. Sometimes you don't have all that time. Maybe you have, 30 minutes or an hour or so. You do it indoors. I used to run a lot. My knees don't let me, but I used to do track when I was little in high school and compete in national sports, etc. But so those sort of cardio things, I like it a lot. I try and do a lot of alone time. I do a lot of alone time in the weekends specifically. I have my time with my family, with my friends, but there's always 2 or 3 hours that I'm just alone, relaxing. I can be doing nothing. And there's also something that helps me a lot is I spend about 1 day a month. It can be a Saturday, or it can be maybe not a full day necessarily, but an afternoon, Friday afternoon, in which I'm absolutely wasting time, just not doing absolutely anything, just procrastinating. And that allows me just to depressurize and just think about something different. And I'm sometimes even my creative solutions come up in those moments. The other thing I'm starting to do a lot is I have more time now to read continuously, and this allows me to learn and to be mentally well. I do a lot of reading in terms of now, which is interesting. I never read like this before, but a lot of well-being, a lot of things about education, which is regular for my job. But I didn't used to read books. I used to read articles and stuff. Now I read books and I concentrate, and this allows me again to do that, to focus. And finally, there's I started meditating. I don't meditate too much, but I do start in the morning with a few breads and stuff like that. I just try to be calm during the whole day. It's just better. Sometimes you can't achieve it. You're not perfect, but as long as you start little by little, eventually it becomes routine, and that helps. It just gives you a better clarity.
You cited a book with a very intriguing title, The Buddha and the Badass. Tell me more. I've never heard of this book.
Well, it's by the founder of Mind Valley University, I think. It was given to me by one of my coaches, my high performing coaches. I recommend everybody has a coach, because you're not good at everything. And if somebody believes one is good at everything, then there's something wrong with you, because you can't be good at everything. So this guy recommended me this book, and it's about basically the Buddhas how to be good with yourself, and the Badass how to be a very high performer in the business. And it's how you can merge both of them. We come from, especially in Mexico, we come from a culture of high stress, high returns. It's not necessarily true. High stress sometimes leads to diminishing returns. I mean, often, I would say all the time, it leads to diminishing returns. People are thinking that you work a lot of hours, you will be more successful. Not necessarily. That doesn't mean you work 1 hour to a week and you'll be successful, but you have to balance this. So the book is about that. It's about how you set an expectation for yourself, how you become, strong emotionally, physically, spiritually, etc. All this well-being around you, and then how to use that to generate a high-performing you and a high-performing team as well.
I'll definitely look it up. And you also reference something that has had a huge impact on me, actually, post-pandemic in particular, which is I went to a Coldplay concert in London. And, again, it's after years of being cooped up at home and in isolation and all these kinds of areas, all of a sudden you're in a stadium of 70, 80, 90,000 people and blaring out these great songs. It felt like a spiritual experience almost.
Almost.
And, you talk about Coldplay actually as being part of your repertoire of great music that you like listening to. Is that a similar kind of like awakening that you get when you listen to music?
I think the whole experience is distracting, and it's also good for you. I mean, everything that you spend a lot of time on stressful issues. Life is stressful. That's a fact. But if you're not able to balance it with stuff that makes you happy, or just think about something else, or put your mind space somewhere else, that I think is Coldplay gives me that. Other concerts as well, and do a lot of just talking to friends does the same.
Of course,
just generate endorphins or whatever you want to call it. It's good.
Great. So we've talked about having purpose, having a clear vision. We've talked about starting with you. What is your third lesson with regards to driving high performance?
I think, and this is cliche, but having the right team. The right team doesn't mean people that do what you want them to do, but people that can be better at what you want them to do, what actually you want them to do. The way I approach building teams, this is something I've changed. I usually started building teams that I could somewhat push to do what I wanted them to achieve. And right now, I think I'm hiring talent for a specific position that could take that position to a different place. So they are required to at least do what they can, or what they should, but they should improve it significantly and have a different impact. And that allows you to step back and think about the right direction. And if the person is the right fit in the culture and in the strategy and in the position that they're playing, they will help you get out of the way and make you be very successful. If they're, just good at following orders, it won't be. And the other thing that it's very important for me is something that I've learned. This, again, it's obvious, but sometimes people are, too paternalistic, or they don't want to make the difficult decisions. We have to eliminate cultural threats in the company very quickly. And that means sometimes even letting go people that are performing but are not good team players, or they don't follow the values, or they're not aligned with the strategy. I think that the CEO's role is focusing on strategy, then culture, and then assigning resources. So if number two, culture for me is the most important. That's what makes a difference. That's what actually sustains in time. You're going to need to have change strategy now and then. Culture is something that's just profoundly sedimented, and there's two different types of values: the values that you as a founder have, and then the values that the company evolves. There's some values that are non-negotiable. For me, those are the founding values. So for me, for example, my non-negotiable values are exponential growth. Thinking about exponential growth, having an impact for transformation, having an impact and having a transformation. So those are the three things that you have to do in your job here. Now, there's other values like teamwork and stuff like that. Those can be evolving. But if your team is not capable of playing those values and those roles, it's not work.
In the K-12 sector in particular, when we studied high performance through the World's Best School Prizes, which is a platform that we've created, what we found was that schools that do well, generally speaking, work at different aspects of their culture. But when you ask schools as to, well, how do you assess your culture and then how do you improve it, there aren't many tools available. So we conducted a humongous amount of research in this space, ranging from focus groups to a massive survey to speaking to academics and experts, speaking to industry leaders like yourself. And what we learned was actually great school culture rests on 4 different foundations. So the first one is leadership. The second is around an enabling or supportive environment. The third is what we call collaboration, having a collaborative environment. And the fourth is around professional wellness, or what other people call health and well-being. And we try to help schools, on that kind of journey to think through these 4 things in particular. And so you, as a leader of a significant institution, education institution, when you think about culture, and you can take any one of these areas, what are the specific techniques you use or programs you use to engender high performance? So let's take an example of collaboration. It's well evidenced that collaborative environments make for better culture. So how do you engender collaboration at Talisis?
Yeah, let me step back there a little bit. So the way we view culture is the way that we define it is the day. How do you work on a daily basis? How do you work every day?
Yeah.
What do you do? So we have in our culture, in the center of our culture, we have everything that we do has to be for the benefit of our students and our teachers. Every single decision that you're not going to fail, you're not going to make a bad decision, even if it's money or whatever, if you look for the benefit of the student and the teachers. So that allows everything that I'm going to say after to be flexible and to generate exceptions. Now, the way we approach culture is the first is exactly what you said. We call it behaviors or principles or values. But behaviors is you have to have teamwork. You have to have all this stuff. But that's not possible if the right talent is not in the company. So for me, it's like a circle. So you have behaviors. What behaviors do you want the company to focus on? Focusing every time on the customer, on the client. That's the student and the teacher. Second, it's behaviors. Third, or second, I would say, is talent. What is the right talent? How should it be structured? What is their job description? How are they incentivized? Every single aspect that has to do with what's their well-being. What aspects are we going to help them on? When is it the right time to get holidays, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have KPIs or OKRs, so objectives and key results. Where do we want to go there? What do we want to reach? And what are the KPIs to measure them? Those have to be clear. That's how you measure the success of the talent. But then also, they have to have as number 4, you need to have processes. What are the processes that they're going to follow? 5, what are the rituals? When I say rituals is, what are the day-to-day activities? You have a weekly meeting, a stand-up meeting, a town hall meeting. And for example, we have rituals for performance, OKRs, which means basically everything has to be with operations. And second, for strategy. How do we revise strategy every 2 months? How do we do agile teams or Scrum meet or whatever? And then number 3 is culture. So we have this thing called connections. How do we connect? How do we work as a team? Blah, blah, blah. And then finally is after rituals, number 6 is tools. So that means infrastructure, that means technology, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh.
So the way those 6 things work, that's the way we define culture in our company. Everything has to work together for this culture to be high performing, because you might want to be collaborative. But if you understand what position you're playing and the objectives or key results are not set, and the process that I'm playing, or I don't have the right tools, there's no way I can be collaborative. It's very hard, right? There is attitude,
Right.
but then there's also everything that has to be working as a system. That's the way we think about it, because again, we're operating in 110 cities. So we need to think about the systemic route for us.
And Nicho, like, at the heart of all of this is leadership. Like, in the wider world, I would perhaps be bold enough to say that we lack leadership and the bench is quite short. When you think about leadership development on your platform, for all of your colleagues and senior employees and partners, what are the specific things that you have learned about leadership development that, if I was a school principal, I would do well to understand?
Well, in terms of the school principals, in our case, we have school principals, what we call rectors, but or the deans of the schools. I think for them is whatever helps them make their job easier and better. That's what we focus on. So we have several corporate training, internal corporate training programs. We do academic training. We do a lot of. Well, sorry, let me start. Well, the most important one is what we call Talisis way, which just described. It's a culture.
Yeah.
So everybody, there's a lot of training around that. There's a lot of listening. There's a lot of benchmarking. There's a lot of improvement, making people feel participated. And if all the deans understand this and they execute on this, success will happen. But the specific training on every single process that happens there, or every single item that occurs there. So for example, what is collaboration? What is our mission? What are our differentiators? Why are we going to do this? Everything is structured in our own learning platform. And then number 3, we do spend a lot of time trying to figure out the well-being of people. Do they have when I say well-being, is internal and external. Do they have the right tools to do their job correctly? Do we have the right feedback loops to do the job correctly? Are we incentivizing them correctly? Are they getting the right rewards? Are they being led by the regional leader in the right way? How is their stress level? And then externally, are they okay with their families, with their personal life, with their physical well-being? And all that, for me is how do you, implement leadership? But also I spend a lot of time, I almost feel like I'm a preacher all the time, reinforcing the vision, reinforcing the mission. Well, why are we here? Let's not forget that we're actually changing lives and communities in Mexico, and strengthening people, empowering them with knowledge so they can actually be successful and make an impact into communities. But we're a mission-driven company. So that's my job. It's making sure everybody understands the mission and why we're doing this.
Tell me, Nicho, in terms of, I get the vision and the mission, I get that piece of it, but isn't it it must be quite a difficult task to do, given just the sheer scale of disruption out there in industry in particular, with things like, I would be remiss not to ask you about the impact of Gen AI, for example, on everything that you do, as an example. Given that you're so close to the workplace in terms of what you're trying to do with your graduates, what pointers can you give to those people that are listening to this podcast as to how they should be thinking about such developments, and not just technological developments, but also could be geopolitical development? All these disruptions that happen. How do you cope with that?
Well, let me start with the easy one, technology. That's fairly simple. I would embrace it. I mean, it's coming. It's going to be a huge revolution for education. I'll give you a few examples of what we're doing and why you might expect, well, we're a traditional on-site university, professional university. Well, you're going to be disrupted. Yeah, we are, but we hope to be the disruptors as well. So basically, there's 3 things that we're focusing right now with Gen AI and other tools. The first one is the first that we start is we're actually building content a lot cheaper, faster. It's about 80 to 90% quicker and cheaper. And that allows us to not just read our content, but we're putting content together so that we generate courses and we improve courses for students and for companies. We also do a lot of corporate training programs, and we're doing that a lot faster. We started that last year.
Can I ask you a question on that just as a reaction? So when I hear that from leaders like you, I think in terms of, I've always been a massive fan and votary of teachers. And
Mhm.
what I'm hearing from university leaders is they're using Gen AI to frankly replace teachers. And so give me your response to that.
Well, I'm going to jump to number three then. I'm going to say number two and number three quickly because this is the order. Number one is content and quality
Wow.
curriculum. Number two is we're doing, and this is going to sound like a replacement, but no, we're doing AI tutors. We're just piloting with this, and there's some roles that teachers not necessarily are the best ones are at doing this, and why don't we replace part of what they do and focus teachers on what they do best? And then let me go. And then the third one is giving teachers tools to improve their quality of teaching. It does require a bit of refocusing what they're doing. In our perspective, is teachers will probably stop being replicators and will behave more like life coaches or productivity coaches or people that help you think about a solution to a problem or people that would help you conceptualize a problem differently or people that would help you apply your problem and solve it in your real life situation. We've been piloting with this project in one of our universities for almost 5 years, and it's been a good success here. Students love it. I will give you a number that we piloted this in a high school a few years ago in one of our high schools that we have. In the comparable high school, the price that students are willing to pay for this service is double of the one that doesn't use this service. When I mean services, the coaches are different than teachers. We actually don't coaches. We don't call them teachers. One, we have teachers, regular teachers that they teach. They do teaching, instruction, in front of a classroom with a whiteboard, etc. And they challenge people and etc. And then the other one, we basically generated a new campus in which teachers have an active role in leading a discussion and generating more, making students do self-discovery of what they want to do based on content that they've learned. So it's sort of like a flip model, but we actually do spend a lot of time training those teachers. Now we piloted that, and students are very satisfied so much that they're willing to pay double the amount of money in tuition. But AI for us is how do we give teachers tools to improve this? So you can go into tools that are very invasive, like, for example, facial recognition, and see if students are paying attention, if they're tired, if they're understanding, or things like, for example, what we're building right now is big data models in which you can have the schools, the previous grades. For example, for us is secondary education or high school education. What are the grades of such students? Let's say, Vicas, what were his grades in his previous institution? Where did he struggle? How he's been struggling or not here?
Mm.
What are his friends doing? And then, you can tell your teacher before you start class, because it's gonna, probably need some help in this, needs some help in that. And as that generates a simple job and a much more profound connection between the teacher and students. Now, will that generate less teachers? No, I would say increase the quality of education. I don't see less teacher. I see more quality education. And I don't know, there's, all these online fake teachers or AI teachers, I would say they just fulfill a different purpose. It's just replicators. It's like a book that you can read it. Now you can listen to it. You can ask a question. Well, you can think about it. You can ask, but I say teachers are going to be more meaningful for us than they have been. They should be, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Nicho, thank you so much for your time today. I really am grateful to you for sharing your thoughts on a vast number of topics actually related to high performance. Good luck to you and your platform. And please know that we are watching from afar about all the great things that you're trying to revolutionize in education, especially in your country. And you have our solidarity and our support. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lucas. It's a pleasure.
What a great conversation we've just had with Nicho from Talisis in Mexico, where he talked about, the world of further education, higher education, and its connection to the world of work, which is what, or rather I would say he makes the focus of Talisis, which is the platform that he created with so many students in and around Mexico. We talked about building high performance institutions in particular, which is the basic premise of this podcast. And he talked about three significant lessons. The first, and we've heard a few times now through all our interviews, has been start with you. Be well in all ways, as he referenced it. And he talked about some of the things that he does, including taking holidays, but more importantly, to make sure that he remains charged and actually can drive institution building in his country. So that's a really important lesson that he leaves us with, which is to start with you. The second, again, which we've heard a few times, is around having a clear sense of purpose and mission, and being able to articulate your vision in simple but palpable terms. And if you were to do that and talk about it to your schools, your universities, your organizations, as if it's actually already happening and manifesting it to happen, as opposed to an airy-fairy aspiration, is how I heard him articulate the second lesson of high performance. And the third thing he talked about was, again, is no surprise and comes up repeatedly, which is to build a team that is capable to perform in the position they're required to, but they can also go out of their way to help the whole team win. And he specifically touched on this subject of eliminating cultural threats or silos that exist very quickly. And so these three lessons, I think, are pretty universal and very profound, actually, if you're able to implement them in your institutional building efforts, whether it's a school or a university. And I'm grateful to him for joining us here today on the Edvance Podcast. Now, if you have enjoyed this conversation, can I please encourage you to hit the subscribe button on whichever platform you get your podcast from, so that we can then start attracting also different types of speakers and interviewees who can also stretch our imagination and our understanding and knowledge about high performance. It matters a lot, so I'll be really grateful if you could spend a moment doing so. Thank you, and I look forward to the next opportunity.